Israel launched a major attack on Iran's nuclear and military sites with the declared aim of destroying Iran's nuclear program. Iran retaliated with massive barrages of hundreds of missiles targeting Israeli cities, among others hitting Israel's military headquarters. Meanwhile, as things escalate, fighting in Gaza continues, days after the IDF recovered the bodies of 2 more hostages from the Gaza Strip. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Friday, June 13th, Israel launched a massive surprise attack on Iran's nuclear and military capabilities. This attack comes years after the two countries have been continuously threatening all-out war with each other, and constitutes by far the largest escalation in the ongoing war in the Middle East. Now, before I start going over the details of what has happened between Israel and Iran, I have to note that things are developing extremely rapidly, and even as I'm recording this, there are continuous reports coming in about IDF strikes in Iran and missiles that are being fired from Iran hitting Israeli targets. Therefore, I'm going to try to summarize the main events from the hundreds of different incidents that have occurred over the last 48 hours, but it's important to remember that the situation is constantly developing and changing. Starting with Israel's initial attack, after days of escalatory rhetoric and reports that the nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran have reached a dead end, at 2:59 a.m. on June 13th local time, Israel launched its attack. The initial move included 5 waves of airstrikes and massive bombings throughout Iran, focusing primarily on assassinating high-profile figures in Iran's military and in its nuclear program, as well as targeting nuclear facilities, missile bases, and Iranian air defenses. The first wave took place in the capital city of Tehran and focused on assassinating the top leadership of Iran's military and of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. According to reports, Israel had carried out a deceptive act in order to lure the top brass of all of Iran's security establishment into a joint meeting, concentrating them in several different headquarters and then striking in the first opening wave. Now, the list of the assassinations in that first wave is actually quite long, and includes, among others, 9 prominent scientists who were working on Iran's nuclear program, as well as at least 20 other generals and key military figures in Iran's military and in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Therefore, I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I will mention some of the most important figures who were assassinated in that first wave. These include Hussein Salami. He is the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. I remind everyone that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards is the organization that is tasked with both preserving the Iranian Revolution as well as exporting it throughout the Middle East. In other words, all the connections to the different militias and regimes in the Middle East were under the command of Hussein Salami. In addition to him, Muhammad Bakri was the chief of staff of Iran's military. That makes him the most senior commander-in-chief of Iran's armed forces. He was also assassinated in that opening attack. In addition to them, Rolam Ari Rashid was Bakri's deputy and the person who was supposed to fill in for Bakri as the chief of staff of Iran's security forces if Bakri was killed. However, Rashid was also killed in this opening attack. In addition to them, Amir Ali Haji Zada was the Air Force commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. That is a particularly important role because that makes him the single most important person who was in charge of all of Iran's attacks against Israel throughout the war, coordinating the attacks of the different Iranian militias and Iran itself with regards to projectiles, missiles, and drones that were fired at Israel. He was also assassinated. In addition to them, Ali Samhani was the former defense minister of Iran and one of the closest advisors to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, also assassinated in that opening attack. Finally, concluding this list, an interesting situation has emerged with regards to the figure of Ismail Qaani, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force. He is the person who replaced Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated in 2020. Reports in Iran stated that he too was among those who were assassinated in the IDF's initial strikes, and while the IDF stated that it is possible that he was killed, unlike the other figures, Israel did not have any information about his assassination, i.e., Israel is not saying that they tried to assassinate him. Possibly he was assassinated, possibly not. Israel did say that it tried to assassinate those other figures, but the role of Ismail Qaani, and was he a target, and is he alive or dead, right now still remains in question. After the initial wave of assassinations in Tehran, the second wave of Israeli attacks targeted one of Iran's main nuclear facilities in the areas of Natanz, and later in the night there were also reports of explosions in other nuclear facilities around Iran, including in the areas of Bushehr, Qom, Arak, and Isfahan. There were also explosions reported in what has been argued to be Iran's most important nuclear facility in the areas of Fordow. However, some of these reports are contradictory, so I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. In addition to the nuclear sites, there were reports of major attacks targeting different military bases throughout Iran. These included in the areas of Hormabad, Kermanshah, Hamdan, Shiraz, and Tabriz, where video footage also showed extensive secondary explosions. Amidst these attacks on the Tabriz military base, there were also reports that the airport in Tabriz was completely destroyed. In terms of understanding how these attacks of the IDF were so successful, in addition to the initial strikes that completely disrupted the chain of command of Iran's military, and the airstrikes that also targeted Iranian air defenses, another facet that facilitated these attacks was reportedly Mossad activity on the ground in Iran. Among others, it was reported that as part of the attack, Mossad agents planted explosive devices that neutralized an array of air defense missiles that Iran had both in Tehran and around the different nuclear facilities. It was also reported that the Mossad established mobile attack systems that used technological means to disrupt Iran's air defense systems, and a video was also published by Israel showing Mossad agents who activated a base of suicide drones that they had established on the ground in Iran, targeting the extremely important Aspajabad military base near Tehran. As a result of all this activity, it was reported that no air defense systems were operated by Iran against the Israeli Air Force during that initial 5 waves of attacks. After that initial attack, Israel declared that it had codenamed this operation Operation Rising Lion, and that the aim is to completely destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. Responding to this attack, Iran declared what it called Operation True Promise 3, following the escalations of April and October of 2024 that were each codenamed respectively by Iran True Promise and True Promise 2. The first military response came between 6 to 8 hours after Israel's initial attack, with the launching of a barrage of nearly 100 drones that Iran fired towards Israel. While these were all intercepted, hours later Iran fired the first barrage of almost 100 ballistic missiles, targeting a wide array of cities within Israel. These were followed by 2 more barrages of ballistic missiles, and while most of these were intercepted, some did manage to penetrate Israel's air defenses. Among others, the missiles hit civilian residential targets in the areas of Ramat Gan, Rishon LeZion, and Tel Aviv. In addition to this, one missile managed to hit Israel's military headquarters in Tel Aviv, known as the Kiryah. This is essentially equivalent to Israel's Pentagon building. It is the area where Israel houses all of its military headquarters. And while there was a vast media blackout in Israel with regards to the targeting of the Kiryah building, it was reported by several foreign news sources almost immediately, with footage also backing up that one of the buildings in the Kiryah was in fact hit. In addition to these attacks, throughout Saturday there were continuous barrages of drones and missiles that were fired from Iran, targeting different areas within Israel, with many drones reportedly being intercepted over the Red Sea, some in Jordanian airspace, and some in Syria. In a caveat, I'm going to say that some of these barrages targeting Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa have continued while I'm recording this. This is an image of a missile that hit the city of Bat Yam in central Israel during the past hour, and there are reports of other missiles that hit other cities in the Shfela and in Rehovot, reportedly hitting one of the buildings in the Academic Weizmann Center as well. Amidst Iran's retaliation, on Saturday morning, shortly before these missile barrages, Israel sent messages to Iran saying that if Israeli civilian targets are struck by Iranian missiles, then Israel will in turn target Iranian quote-unquote national interests, understood to be code for Iranian oil production and economic capabilities. Hours after that, those missile barrages did in fact target civilian targets within Israel, and shortly after the third missile barrage, it was reported that the IDF has launched a major assault on different targets throughout Tehran and in the Persian Gulf in southern Iran. Among others, the targets of those attacks included a refinery that is part of the natural gas field in the Persian Gulf, leading to major fires breaking out in the areas near Bushehr. Later in the evening, massive attacks were also reported throughout Tehran. Among others, these targeted Iran's Department of Defense headquarters, the Department of Nuclear Development, and nuclear research labs. The most substantial attack of those barrages in Tehran, however, appears to have targeted the main oil rig in the region. These attacks caused massive fires to spread across the oil fields in the areas of Tehran, in the site that reportedly contains some 260 million liters of oil. Following these attacks, Israel's Minister of Defense Israel Katz also put out a tweet saying, quote, "Tehran is burning," end quote. By Saturday night, it was reported that some 12 people in Israel have been killed in Iranian missile strikes, and well over 200 have been injured in the different missile attacks. In turn, in Iran, it was reported that close to 90 people have been killed and some 400 have been injured in the IDF attacks. I do have to add a few words of warning, however, when it comes to the casualty numbers that are being reported. Again, these attacks are still ongoing, and I had literally just updated the number of people who were killed in Israel moments before recording this. And at the same time, the numbers of people who have been killed and injured in Iran have not been updated since that first wave of IDF attacks, and since then there have been massive attacks in Tehran and other areas in Iran, so it is very likely that the actual number of casualties in Iran at this point is much higher, and also it is very likely that the number of casualties in Israel is going to constantly change as the evening goes on. While these attacks between the countries are still ongoing, taking a step back for a moment, a lot of questions have been raised over the past 48 hours with regards to this escalation, including about the stability of the Iranian regime and about other actors within the Middle East and how they are possibly involved. With regards to the Iranian regime, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu put out several videos immediately after the initiation of those attacks, repeatedly calling upon the Iranian people to rise up against the leadership, saying just like the people of Lebanon and the people of Syria have become free of dictatorships, so too he calls upon the people of Iran to rise up against the Islamic Republic. While there are no reports that I have seen at this point about the population in Iran supporting the Israeli airstrikes, or of any popular dissent amidst the chaos that is ensuing in Tehran, it was reported on June 13th that the Iranian government has disconnected the internet connection of the entire country, and I only mention that because that is a move that the regime has done in the past in order to either avoid or curtail mobilization against the regime. Again, I haven't seen any reports that there is actually mobilization like that right now brewing in Iran, but it is possible that the regime is fearful that amidst the chaos there might be some sort of rebellious or revolution-style mobilization. With regards to the regional and international implications, I'll say that while in the Middle East nearly all countries reacted with a condemnation of Israel's attacks, called for de-escalation, and are somewhat involved, the most important countries in this context are possibly Jordan and Iraq, due to their geographical location between Israel and Iran. When the escalations broke out, both countries immediately scrambled to try to ensure that they are not pulled into the fighting. Jordan immediately closed its airspace and also actively intercepted Iranian drones and missiles that crossed over the country, stating that it will intercept any hostile entity that violates Jordanian airspace. Iraq in turn immediately appealed to both Iran and the United States in order to try to keep it out of the escalation, asking Iran to ensure that no U.S. interests are attacked on Iraqi soil, and asking the United States to stop Israel from using Iraqi airspace in order to attack Iran. Alongside these regional actors, the United States' response is also critically important in order to understand where the winds are going to blow with regards to this escalation in Israel and Iran. The United States was reportedly informed by Israel prior to the attack, and U.S. President Trump stated on the day of the attack that he had given Iran every possible opportunity to come to a deal, but that they refused to actually sign the deal that was proposed. He also said that he gave Iran a 60-day deadline when negotiations started, and the attack happened on day 61. While the United States did participate in intercepting Iranian missiles and drones that were launched towards Israel, the administration issued several statements throughout the first 24 hours of the escalation, saying that the U.S. is not taking part in the Israeli attacks and calling Iran back to the negotiating table. Trump himself stated that he hopes Iran understands that it should make a deal, saying, and I quote, "My friend Bibi is crazy, and therefore calling on Iran to come back to the table quickly, implying that possibly more escalations are going to happen in Iran and that he cannot control what Israel does unless Iran comes back and signs a deal. Other quotes from the US president throughout the escalation thus far included stating that he had spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin and that he thinks that the war between Iran and Israel should end and that President Trump agrees that the war should end. However, Trump also stated that the attack on Iran will be good for the economic markets because it means that Iran will not get nuclear weapons. Moments before recording this, there were also two more developments with regards to the US involvement in the escalation. One was a report that Iran has asked Qatar and Oman to again start negotiating between Tehran and Washington, D.C. in order to bring the sides back to the negotiating table, but that Iran says this can only happen if Israel will stop its attacks. In turn, a second report was that there is going to be an emergency meeting in the Pentagon to discuss the Israeli request that the United States join the attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, with some reports suggesting that Israel is asking for U.S. assistance in attacking the nuclear facility in the area of Fordow. As I stated above, this is possibly the most important nuclear site in Iran and is buried deep underground in the mountain in Iran. There have been contradictory reports throughout the past 48 hours. Some suggested that the site has been attacked and damaged. Others suggested the site is yet to be attacked. What is for sure is no one is claiming the attack that site has been destroyed yet, and possibly that is where Israel is asking for U.S. assistance in order to attack and destroy that nuclear facility. Before I conclude, I want to add that beyond this escalation between Israel and Iran, it is also important to remember the ongoing situation in the Gaza Strip, including active fighting between Israel and Hamas and the hostage situation. I'm not going to go into too much detail because the situation between Israel and Iran has really overshadowed everything, but just a few highlights that are worth mentioning from the past week. On June 11th, the IDF recovered the bodies of 2 hostages that have been held in the Gaza Strip. These include the bodies of Yair Yaakov, who had been killed on October 7th and his body was kidnapped back to the Gaza Strip, and the body of another hostage whose name has not yet been published. I will say that it is quite surprising that the name has not been published yet, since the reports suggest that his family has been informed. However, at this point there are no rumors circulating even that I have seen, so we don't have any conclusive evidence as to whose other body has been retrieved. After that recovery, there are currently still 53 hostages who remain in the Gaza Strip. Of these, 20 are considered alive, 30 are confirmed dead, and 3 more are very likely dead. However, they have not been declared as such by the IDF. In addition to this, there have been continuous fighting throughout the Gaza Strip over the past several days, including in and around the Netzarim corridor and in other areas in northern Gaza. The IDF has reported that 2 soldiers were injured during the fighting in the last several days, and the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that over the past 48 hours, 90 Palestinians have been killed, including 29 of them who were attempting to reach the food distribution centers of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Related to this, a third report from Gaza is that on the day of the attack in Iran, the IDF ordered the closure of all distribution centers of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in the Gaza Strip, stating that security considerations amidst this escalation with Iran are too great. It was reported that some of these centers were reopened on June 14th. However, there was no official statement made about this, so it is somewhat unclear right now how many of those distribution centers of food in the Gaza Strip are open and how many of them are still closed. 2 more reports from Gaza over the last several days. One is that the IDF is thinning out its forces in the Gaza Strip and moving entire divisions of soldiers out of the Gaza Strip to other set locations in Israel amidst these escalations with Iran. And a third report is that Hamas has also responded to the escalations between Israel and Iran, with the Al-Qassam spokesperson Abu Ubaidah issuing statements of support for the Iranian regime and stating that Israel is attacking Iran because of Iran's support of the Palestinians, and that he hopes that the axis of resistance continues to stand firm amidst Israeli aggression. Those are my highlights on the recent developments and escalations in the Middle East. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out, send them on to anyone who you think might be interested in updates on the war and what is going on in the Middle East. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.